Do you feel kind of out of your league when it comes to lab testing or talking about lab testing? So, unless you've done some kind of in depth functional coach certification or you've done, say, an FDN training, you may be just dangerous enough, right? As far as the knowledge you have, and yet may not completely understand how you as a trainer can benefit and can change your exercise prescription based on knowledge that a client may come to you already having a test has. So, in this episode, I'm going to talk about what you can learn from the results that someone has if they're working with a functional doctor. And number two, what you might want to suggest if what you're doing is giving you signs and symptoms that they're doing everything they can or should that you would recommend and still not getting results. And I say that based on information that I would want a menopause client to get from, say, our Flipping 50 menopause fitness specialist. So if you're not quite sure how to specialize in working with menopause, what's different, what changes, and what could be actually backfiring that you may be behind unintentionally, I highly recommend that you come to the show notes today and look at the Flipping 50 Menopause Fitness Specialist. If you're making any of your revenue from menopause midlife clients or want to, it's a no-brainer. A single client sale. And if not, we need to raise your rates, by the way. We'll pay for that course, but it is well worth it. I'm Deborah Atkins, and you're listening to She Means Fitness Business, a division of Voice for Fitness, my LLC. And at Voice for Fitness, we all know that you want to be an inspirational example to other midlife women. In order to do that, you need a profitable health and fitness coaching business. And the problem usually, or often anyway, is a lack of clients or a lack of revenue because you're charging too little and you're working too much time. And that can end up making you feel like you're uncertain this will actually work or you can sustain it without burning yourself out. I get it. I was there. And that's why I work with clients internationally, and I have for over 25 years. But before you book a call to actually see if one-on-one is a fit for you and for me, I want you to get the downloadable self-assessment. It's the Health and Fitness Coach's Business Scorecard. You'll know in 2 minutes where are the holes in your business. What is it that you need? So today, I want to make sure before we dive in too far that you realize this is an overview. So I can't possibly give you in 30 minutes or less what I give to our menopause fitness specialists. And obviously, I'm not going to give you the certification content, but you do need to have a good idea of when you put on either hat. One, you support clients with, you might want to think about doing this testing or asking your practitioner about this testing and whether they will write that in for you, so that obviously most people want to use insurance if they can. Now, not all the tests will be covered depending on what they need. But I want to give you a background or a basis for what you should know and know about at the very least. You don't necessarily have to know these in depth. You may decide that is an area that I want to refer out to. I don't want to go too deep. But the more you know, number one, the more you know for yourself. And the more you know for your daughters, and the more you know about how you can use the results from that test. But you still want a general idea of tests so that you can put together the things that I will suggest to you. This is how that might affect, if you knew it, might affect the exercise prescription that they have. So my question is, are you using lab tests for menopause clients to guide your exercise prescription? I hope so. If you've got some confusion, it's time to get clear. Listen to this. You're very likely, you are probably a woman in midlife herself and may also be new to menopause symptoms, treatment, and lifestyle options. So this episode will serve as an overview. Lab tests for menopause clients is something we go into much more deeply so you can understand what's out there, why Western labs don't tell the whole story, And the difference between norms and optimal levels are also very different. Our specialists, our Flipping 50 Menopause fitness specialists, have a better understanding of how to support clients that they work with, collaboratively doing that with practitioners about what to ask, why they might want to seek answers to questions tied to their ability to get results from exercise and dietary changes. So, I will link to more information on the Flipping 50 Menopause Fitness Specialist. Let's explore options, insights, and how the results can help you if clients already have them. So let's take a look at Western versus uh, functional versus Western trained lab testing. It's kind of like root cause, trying to find the root cause of a problem versus illness detection. That's the difference. So functional being, let's get to the bottom of this and figure out why the symptoms and the signs are happening in the first place. And a Western kind of lab, Western trained docs, are a lot more dedicated to illness detection, like finding out, is there an illness? And yes, it's somewhat prescriptive, right? So we know if you have a little bit higher than normal blood pressure, they'll say, hey, I want you to keep an eye on this, maybe reduce the sodium, get a little bit more relaxation in, get some walking in, reduce the stress. So there is some of that going on. I don't discount. Some doctors are probably better than others, but doctoring is a tough business. I mean, they don't have it easy either, right? They're, given lots of clients and a lot of load, and they don't get very, very much time with any one patient. So it's difficult. And I think there's a lot of litigation out there. So that's always going to be a concern. But here's the difference. When we talk Western trained medicine and doctors, we also talk usually about insurance. And insurance only covers certain tests. It won't cover something that is actually a functional test most often. So if your doctor was Western trained first and then became more interested in functional medicine, that's a great bonus for you or for your client if we're talking about them. So what you want to do with your Western trained doc in medicine, because we all need a GP, right? A general practitioner, but that annual blood panel, obviously easy, right? If you're feeling ill or sick, obviously that's the first place that you're going to go. If it's something that is mysterious, you don't know what is the problem, again, good place to go first, maybe to get referred out. So you definitely take advantage of all those tests. And I would suggest any that are here, ask for them. But what you need to be wary of or know for your client's sake is, that complete blood panel. That's great. That's going to show, inflammatory markers like A1C, CRP. That tells you what's going on inside the body. Now, that's not the only place inflammation will show up. Sometimes it's in retaining water. But then there's also fasting blood glucose levels. May not be totally conclusive. It doesn't tell you what's happening day to day on a daily basis with glucose, but certainly a fasting blood sugar level and fasting insulin are both very important. And that's done easily with Western testing and docs. But thyroid is where it gets tricky. And if they're testing any micronutrients like folate or say selenium, no big deal. But if they're testing iron levels, like you need to look at ferritin and serum ferritin in order to get the whole picture on iron levels as they relate to energy. So things get a little tricky, but thyroid is another perfect example. So really being able to look at thyroid and looking at T3, T4, reverse T3, and antibodies, as well as TPO. So antibodies, if they're higher elevated, can be a clue into Hashimoto's thyroiditis. That's an autoimmune disease. 90% of thyroid disease is Hashimoto's. but then isn't really treated as it because for Western trained docs, it's actually not discovered. Many of them really haven't talked about that until very recently. And it has to happen from people who are like torching paths for the very first time, talking about things that are not popular and not in current science that people don't believe yet. Because, there's a 20-year gap between science when it comes out in peer reviewed journals and when it actually makes it to, say, guidelines, position statements, or organizational meetings, even about guidelines and position statements. And then it's so slow to change because it takes a vote of a lot of people. So there you have it. So you could do with your Western trained doc a complete blood panel. You might do thyroid, but it could be inconclusive. So if your client is still tired, gaining weight, can't understand that. That's the most part for thyroid. It's low functioning as opposed to high functioning, where there may be bulging eyes and weight loss instead. Fewer people have that issue. Most have weight gain and sluggish thyroid from over adrenal issues, like over adrenal taxation and cortisol levels high for too long until maybe they're low. Cortisol saliva, generally a Western trained doctor won't do that. You might get a progressive one to do it. A stool test is something that a Western trained doc may do, especially if you're complaining about gut issues and it's ongoing. If they think or suspect or want to rule out anything else, and then ultimately they may be telling you it's IBS. But you should, with a stool test, be able to get, is there any parasite? Is there bacteria? Where's your microbiome? You may or may not get that kind of information. If you do get that information, the value of that is that right away the level of, say, is it at a +4? Is it a +4? Is it at a 1? Is it at a negative? And then you can take a probiotic, but of a specific strain. So you can see what you're void in, or what's extremely low or it's extremely high and shouldn't be, so that you know how to fix that. And things like grapefruit extract, something you can get over the counter, but you may not need it or may not know that you need to take it or that a client could. And these are things that they're available for the learning online. Some things you can't trust and you may not want to send your clients there, but other things like this, like what if I have an overgrowth of a bad bacteria? And lab test results will often give you some of this. Like, here's the suggestion. This number was really high. Possible things that you could do. This number was really low. This strain, obviously, if it was low, you would want to take a probiotic that had specifically that in it. A little food for thought, that when you're taking a probiotic, if you go to the store and you're looking at a probiotic and you're just reading the label, it just says the words, it's really not a high quality probiotic. You want to know that any strain of a probiotic that you're taking has a number behind it. Did you know that? Truth. That means it's actually the real and active form. Right? So go look at those labels right now. And then next time you're at the store or you're Googling on Amazon, take a good look at what you're getting. Dutch test is another one. So Dutch test is generally a functional doctor may do it, may not do it, but a Western trained doctor won't at all do it. So it looks at metabolites, tells you a little bit. Dutch stands for dried urine testing. So Dutch, yeah, I know. It's a reach, but that's where it came from. So there's blood tests. There's so far saliva tests. Cortisol saliva test is my favorite as far as accuracy. Dutch test is dried urine. It also will look at cortisol levels as well as your estrogen, your progesterone, your testosterone. It'll look at DHEA and how you metabolize all three of the estrogens. Some are going to make you more prone for breast cancer. And you want to see, where are you metabolizing your estrogens? And do you metabolize poorly? And how could you fix that? That's something that a functional doctor would look at with you. And what kind of special things do you need to do if you don't metabolize well? So, lab testing that your menopause clients may want, and that you may be able to say, oh, I can help you with that. Inflammatory markers. These are things that you may be wanting to ask them about. Let's talk about your diet. Like, how much processed food are you eating? How about sugar? How about alcohol, A1C and CRP? Those things are things you want to look at. Here's what you may want to pay less attention to, and not go off the rails about. But it seems to be the one that clients are most familiar with because they've talked about it their whole lives since health in 7th grade, and that is cholesterol. Women in menopause often have their cholesterol levels go up. It is related to low estrogen levels. Your HDL will go up. If you have low estrogen levels, they may have cystic acne if their estrogen levels are low. And I would not get concerned. And where they will jump to is because of historically, this is what they learned. And so did we. But unfortunately, many of us also turned around and taught it. And that is that saturated fats, like saturated animal protein, will cause their cholesterol to go up. And this is false. It's been retracted from the science. And yet, because we learned it at a time when we were very impressionable, and then we've kind of locked it into our heads, and we see it still in print, because if it's online, it's always going to be in print. And we still carry that around, our impression and the gut feeling that, oh, when I'm eating all these eggs, it's high in cholesterol, so my cholesterol is probably going to go up. I shouldn't have that because it's high in cholesterol. Or animals protein and red meat, that's really bad. And it's not linked to high cholesterol. Saturated fat is less linked to high cholesterol. Again, but it's hard to get those things out. So focus on the inflammatory markers, the sugar combined with fat. But we're not talking about fats from protein. We're talking about fats from chocolate cake. Sugar and saturated fat like that, those are the things that will be more likely to raise and elevate cholesterol levels. Okay, so get clear on some of these things. These are just, we're skimming the surface of our training, but this is important. Saliva cortisol. So let's say the test comes back and you've tested when you do saliva cortisol first thing in the morning, at lunch, at dinner, and right before bed. Ideally for me, the test recommends like 10 p.m., but I'm like, I'd be asleep for 2 hours if I did that. So I'm not going to wake up and do it. But what you want to look at is the curve, the bell curve of your client according to what it should be. And if not, you may want to adjust your exercise because you need to stabilize that. Number one tenet of flipping 50 is restore before more. If you drive that client into the ground with exercise that you think is going to help them burn fat, you're actually probably bringing them closer to burnout. You cannot burn out and burn fat off if you're driving their adrenals into the ground. We have to know these things first about where's their cortisol levels and what's the status of their adrenals based on how long has this been going on, been dealing with stressors, been having these things, been drinking those 4 cups of coffee and fasting till noon thinking that was good. No, right? So we really have to, if we know the cortisol, we can tell them, okay, let's look at your lifestyle habits. Let's see what we can do to improve. That's a huge value. One of the biggest and best things that you can do for menopause clients is help them get their cortisol under control. Wearing a continuous blood glucose monitor, that's not a lab test, obviously, but it is a lab study in real time every day. Generally, one of these lasts for, I happen to have one on, so I say one of these for 14 days, and then you exchange it. And, I like to do 28 days periodically every 3 or 4 months. I highly recommend that you do as well. Test it, test anything, know it, understand the experience before you give it up to your client, but also a great way to share results and support them. Stool testing. So if you have somebody do a micronutrients test, or you know that they have and they bring it to you and they say, okay, well, here's what I'm going to do because my doctor said, I was low in like D and or B12 or iron levels, you know right away they're feeling tired, right? And maybe that's why you recommend, it might be worth you doing a micronutrient test. I wrote about this in You Still Got It, Girl, the After 50 Fitness Formula for Women book that was published, I think, in 2015, the end of the year. You can do this yourself. We call them self-directed tests. It's been out there for 8 or 9 or 10 years. Fewer people knew about them back then, but now more and more people do. We're just taking charge. And not everybody wants to try to run things through their insurance all the time. We just, I want to know what my D levels are. I want to know what my omega-3 levels are, because that can decrease your oxidation and decrease inflammation by not just eliminating the things that drive it up, but also adding omega-3s decreases it. So super smart to do. Stool testing, if you take the micronutrient test, then you start taking micronutrients, you retest, and it's not much better, and the gut seems bad, still bloated, constipation, diarrhea, and it goes on and nothing seems to fix it. Stool testing might be something you want to do, again, to get the results and say, now we can add this probiotic. You can do this for yourself. I do this for myself regularly. Testing hormones. Here's the caveat. I think there's no value in testing hormones with someone unless they want to do hormone replacement therapy. You can tell by their signs and their symptoms if their hormones are off. And if they're testing just to find out, yep, you are low. Okay, but they've decided I don't want to do a hormone replacement therapy, then there was really no point in paying for that. So I think you want to have a conversation first. I hear trainers quite often say, get your hormones tested. That's a great advice. Only if you're working with a functional doctor who's going to prescribe hormone replacement. Ideally, I would suggest bioidentical hormones would be the only thing I'd use, not synthetics, but those that are grown in a lab to be used that are bioidentical to the human body. Not a synthetic, right? That's like using polyester. And I don't do that either anymore when I can help it, right? So it's important that, you want to look at hormones, and maybe you do want to test them if you want to replace. Then recommend somebody doesn't just go to their doc, but probably to a functional doctor, because otherwise they're going to get synthetic hormones if their doctor will even go that far. Thyroid. Often when you go through hormone testing, thyroid will be put in there, but they often don't test the right thing. You need to test both the active and the inactive forms to know if the inactive is converting to the active form, and what are the levels and things that might be getting in the way. Hormones and thyroid are tested together because, say, testosterone levels, if they're low, something you might want to look at is your thyroid functioning? Because that needs to be functioning in order to help your testosterone, and vice versa, right? Need high enough testosterone in order to work on the thyroid. Okay. And also micronutrients work in that way too. If you don't have enough B12, your thyroid will struggle. So this is why all of these things are a very integrated part. Knowing signs and symptoms and where to start is super important. We have an entire module in the Flipping 50 Menopause Fitness Specialist about signs and symptoms. If this is going on, what you might want to do. So not all functional doctors need or favor Dutch testing, the dried urine test, but blood tests can also pinpoint for them hormonal levels, and some are just fine with that. Hormones like estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, and DHEA. You're probably familiar with the first three. Estrogen, obviously, protectant for muscle and for bone. Progesterone is that support for relaxation, chilling out, and in balance of estrogen. So they have to be considered together. And then testosterone for kind of boardroom and bedroom. This is for your take charge, be a leader, feel strong, kind of step into your own self, as well as for libido. And DHEA is a precursor to those three sex hormones. It's like you got to do algebra before you go on to geometry. If you don't have enough DHEA, potentially you're going to struggle with the others. So even though you might be on hormone replacement, if your DHEA levels are low, you're probably going to have to take more of them. So you want to be taking adequate DHEA in order to not have to take so much of the others. And that would be ideal. Okay, I gave you a lot, but really what I want to do is get your wheels turning here about when you're thinking about labs, think of it from two sides. One, if they already have lab results, you want to be able to know and be educated enough to ask about these things. What level are you at? What are you doing? And how do you feel since you've been on that? That should give you a hint about adjusting exercise, and you should keep asking that. If they go back to the doctor, if they change the dose, if they get a new test, continue to ask, continue to adjust, and let them know, hey, you're much stronger. You're getting through workouts easier. Your recovery is better. I would suggest that if you're testing again soon, that you look at your testosterone levels, see where you're at. You may need less of it because we're doing heavier strength training, or I know your protein's been on par, so you're supporting it, helping them realize the things that they're doing that are helping their own body kick into gear with what it is they have to work with now. That's one way. Second, you may want to suggest if you've made all the modifications, really not just according to general guidelines and position statements that don't apply to a woman in midlife or to a woman who's pregnant, right? Or to a young adolescent. I mean, an average built, or a guideline built for some average fits no one. And it's really important that you realize that most of the research is done on men, young athletic men at that. So for a woman in midlife, in hormone chaos, it's not going to apply. So make sure that what you're doing really applies to her, and that you're saying, okay, if we've changed the exercise prescription based on what works best, scientifically proven for women in midlife, and we've changed your diet, we've looked at how we optimize your gut health with changes in your diet. And I know some of you are still recommending dairy. I think you're nuts if you haven't tested your females and know when they can. But if you're showing them ways to encourage more dairy consumption, you may be doing a disservice unless you're willing to openly say, look, not every woman in midlife tolerates dairy right now. It's inflammatory, period, across the board for every individual. Inflammatory, yes. We know this to be true. Can some women tolerate it? Yes. Can some women tolerate it very occasionally, but not a lot, not all the time? Yes. But until you've tested or helped her test, you may not know that. So just be careful and cautious with things that you could suggest. Okay, we've changed the exercise. We've done all the modifications diet-wise. We're looking at how we can improve your sleep with your first thing in the morning and last thing at night. There's a module on that and the specialist. So I hope you know, if you read You Still Got It, Girl, you'll get a lot of suggestions there to help you with your clients as well. But when you've done and exhausted that, then it's a perfect time to say, have you talked about this with your practitioner? Or where are you with your thoughts on what you might do with testing to find out a little bit more about what's going on for you, and what do you want to do, and how do you want to age? What do you want to do with supplements and or with hormone replacement? Have you expanded on that mentally for yourself? Do you know what you want to do? And you may be able to help them with education, if nothing else. I hope this has been helpful. And I know it's been an overview. It's really hard to go into in depth a lot of training, but thinking about these tests and the value for you as a trainer. And if you're listening, you're a health coach, you don't have to physically be working with someone, but most likely you're helping them with their habit. You may be able to help them see this habit may or may not fit for you right now. I hope that's been helpful. In the show notes today, I'll put a link to this business scorecard I mentioned, the Flipping 50 Menopause Fitness Specialist. I will also put that in the show notes, and I will put my favorite lab for self-directed tests. I have a personal page at Your Lab Work, and I have a code for $25 off your first order. So if you yourself want to do a micronutrient test, look at your vitamin B, your iron, your D, your omega-3s, your magnesium, all of those very relevant to energy, gut health, metabolism, inflammation, and super supportive of you right now. So you may want to do it yourself. I'll put all those in the show notes, and those show notes will be at flipping50.com/lab tests for menopause clients. And what are you waiting for? The world needs us right now more than ever.